Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. During my junior year at St. Olaf, I traveled with a class over January to study the fall of the Berlin Wall, the impacts of that 2 years afterwards. We spent time in parts of both Western and Eastern Europe, and I'm really grateful that I was able to be there at that time, including in the weeks following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And at the end of our trip, I stayed a few more days with a friend to travel a bit more, and we went to The Hague and then on to Brussels for a couple of days. And while we were there in Brussels, we were looking for dinner. And after wandering past several restaurants with a keen eye of students on a budget, we finally decided on a restaurant and sat down. And we were the only ones in there, and we were kind of wondering if we had made a good choice. Was there a reason that we were the only people in this restaurant? And then after about 10 minutes or so, two other guys walked in to eat. And as they walked by us, I noticed that one of them was wearing a Gustavus sweatshirt. Two Olis and two Gusties in the middle of Belgium, in a restaurant with nobody else. We made a connection and met up with them again the next day to see part of the city, and it seemed like impossible odds. Decisions to stay longer, to travel to another city, to enter this particular restaurant, whether it was happenstance or some other forces aligning, it's something that I've never really forgotten. Sometimes when we set ourselves in motion, we find that we're led into situations that we could never imagine. What does it take to make you kind of go with the flow and embrace a previously unknown opportunity? Do you consider yourself a spontaneous person? There is, I think, kind of a frame of mind required to be more spontaneous and flexible. And I have to admit, I tend to be a little bit more cautious. I think through things a lot. It's been kind of a running joke with my wife over the years. I often take my sweet time with bigger decisions. But when it comes to smaller everyday things, I'm actually the more spontaneous one. When I'm in a new place or already in motion, I get in kind of a flow and love exploring. Throughout Luke's book of Acts, he chronicles many of these seemingly impossible and miraculous events in the early days of the church. Acts is most often known more fully as the Acts of the Apostles, but many have suggested it really should be called the Acts of the Spirit, because it shows the work of the Spirit in guiding these early Christians. The sense you get as you read through Acts is just this church in motion. People of faith are going with the flow, for lack of a better description. One decision to travel to another city or respond to someone's invitation leads to meeting somebody, and then another crucial experience, and so on. Next week is Pentecost Sunday, and I'll have more to say about the Spirit, but theologian Grace G. Soon Kim has tried to reframe our understanding of the Spirit in ways that may resonate more with modern language. She reminds us that the Hebrew word for Spirit, ruach, is translated wind or breath, and the Greek term is similar, pneuma. It also, that one from Greek is also translated wind or air in motion. And she suggests that we can imagine the work of the Spirit as vibration. Wind and breath both cause vibrations or ripples in actual physical space. The Spirit creates an almost sensory experience. In modern slang, we might call it vibe. The Spirit creates vibe. It creates flow and movement. If we allow ourselves to be moved, we might find ourselves moved around by it. In today's reading from John, Jesus says, "The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I've said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." Jesus is speaking of the Spirit as one who helps us remember and resonate with the wisdom and teaching of Jesus. And part of that includes recalling and finding resonance with the profound peace that we started this series with. Peace is a kind of vibe, a spiritual vibe, spiritual peace, divine peace. Isn't that why so many find meaning and renewal of their spirits in sacred music? Last fall, during our Inspired Life series, we heard our member Aaron Fries, who's a music therapist, talk about the power of music. The right kinds of music can help reduce anxiety and bring peace, among other benefits. That's just a reminder that we have a no-cost, anxiety-reducing, inspirational vibe here at church every week. You're always welcome. Is the Spirit moving you to respond to an invitation or follow some interest? Some discernment is required. Not every impulse and movement may be redemptive, but an unwillingness to be moved and enter the movement of relationships in life may not be either. So many of the stories in Acts suggest the idea of immediate response and action. Today's story in Acts describes Paul in motion. He receives a vision at night. Is this a dream? He has a vision of a man in the region of Macedonia asking for help. And Paul at this point has no permanent home. He goes wherever he feels led. And I imagine, if he had a house and commitments and chores, suddenly leaving for Macedonia would be much harder. But given his life, why not? Maybe it's just a dream, maybe not. He goes, it will be an adventure regardless. Luke recounts the various cities he travels through to get there. Once he arrives in Philippi, which is within the region of Macedonia, what's interesting is nothing notable happens. The supposed man from his vision doesn't appear to be there. No one greets him. Luke says they remained in the city for some days. In other words, they're waiting for something to happen for quite a while. Nothing happens. So they go to a place along the river, which they assumed was a place of prayer. And still no man of Macedonia. But they meet women who are there. And Luke says a certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. And when she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you've judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. As in past weeks, we've been meeting some of these new disciples and leaders in the early church. Lydia has often been regarded as the first Christian in Europe, although this is really only a modern observation. Philippi was in modern-day Greece, but more important at that time is that Macedonia is a Roman colony which will have legal implications down the road as Paul lingers in the area. The passing reference to being a dealer in purple cloth seems kind of trivial, but you have to understand something about purple dye in antiquity. Purple dye was difficult to make and really expensive. It was derived from a type of sea snail. It was a long and involved process that involved fermentation, and it got quite smelly. It took 1,000 mollusks to dye just one cloak. Purple was the color of royalty or wealth. Only the elite could afford to buy purple garments. So Lydia was almost certainly wealthy and had impressive connections. Luke also says that Lydia was a worshiper of God, which implies that she has some orientation toward the God of Israel. But she's not identified as a Jew, so it means that she probably doesn't fit neat categories of religious faith. Lydia not only welcomes Paul and his companions, but they embrace her as a person of faith, and she's baptized and welcomes them into her home. So what can we learn from this story? Paul was willing to be flexible, number one. He set out because of a vision of a man in the region or district of Macedonia, but he ultimately created a connection with a notable businesswoman instead. Lydia probably didn't fit into neat theological beliefs at that time when they met her, but it's clear that she was a person of faith, which led to conversation and new community. We know that Paul later wrote a letter to the Philippians, so this experience was the start of a whole new chapter. When you set new ventures into motion, you never know what may come of it. A few years after my college friend and I ran into a pair of Gustavus students in Brussels, I had entered seminary to become a pastor. Partly because of how unusual it was, I still remembered those students' faces. And while I was walking through a building at Lutheran Seminary in St. Paul, I saw a face of one of those students that I remembered. And so I went across the building and I said hello to him, and I asked him if he remembered me. And he gave me kind of a blank stare, you know. And then he began to explain that he had a twin. But he confirmed that his brother went to Gustavus and would have been in Brussels at that time. The Spirit works in mysterious ways. The early Christian community found ways to tap into the movement and energy that the Spirit was creating, forming connections. It seems they only had to be open to seeing and perceiving a vision of what God was trying to accomplish. In an age in which we need to find ways to create new connections, new pathways forward, to see beyond violence and inequality and justice and difference and so many other challenges. We're called as a congregation to discern where the Spirit is leading us as a community of faith and as disciples of Jesus. Our primary calling is to remain resonant with God's Spirit, which we can hear through the words of Jesus and in community with one another. I know it's easy for me at times to remain static in my patterns and way of thinking. But if we understand that the primary way of understanding God's Spirit is through motion, then maybe we need to reflect on how we can move ourselves off center at times, if for no other reason than to allow God's Spirit to take hold of us and guide us and blow us in the direction where we need to go. Are you open to where God's Spirit may be guiding you? Know that wherever you are and wherever you go, we need not be worried. God's peace has been given to you as a gift. Dwell in that peace. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.